So the war between faithful Catholics in the church and heterodox social justice Catholics who took over a few decades ago is now erupting all over social media. The issue? Well, of course, it's illegal immigration. Here's an extremely heterodox Jesuit priest, James Martin, with a huge following on social media, giving his totally out of context spin on the issue.
Hey everyone, it's Father Jim Martin. Hope you're well. Yesterday on social media, I posted a few things about why Catholics and Christians are called to care for refugees and migrants. It's basically because Jesus asks us to. In Matthew 25, he says to welcome the stranger is to welcome him, and more pointedly, not to welcome the stranger is not to welcome him. But there's also another reason, which is that Jesus himself was a refugee. Now, you might think I've never heard of that. But in the second chapter of Matthew, after the Nativity, Joseph takes Mary and Jesus away from their homeland to Egypt to flee the murderous designs of King Herod. And the classic definition of a refugee, is someone who flees their homeland out of a well-founded fear of persecution, which is exactly what's going on. Now, sometimes people say, oh, well, it was the same country because it was all under the Roman Empire, but, give me a break. They are fleeing Judea and Galilee. I doubt that they thought that Egypt was their homeland. And Father Dan Harrington in the Sacra Pagina series reminds us that Egypt was not under Herod's jurisdiction. By the way, over my shoulder is a painting done by a Ugandan refugee I worked with named Didas Kamagunga. It's called Our Lady of the Refugees, and that's Mary taking Jesus to Egypt. He was a refugee in East Africa where I was working. And it also gives rise to some other beautiful images, like these from Kelly Lattimore. This is La Sagrada Familia. It's the Holy Family as refugees, as migrants along the border. And then migrants and refugees in the Middle East. So as we think about how we talk about refugees and migrants and how we treat them, it's not simply that Jesus asks us to welcome them and to treat them with dignity, but that Jesus himself was a refugee or a migrant. So just something to keep in mind. God bless you.
Well, that garbage brought a terrific blowback from Catholics who actually believe the faith. That blowback caused Martin to make a follow-up post. Says right here, I always find the pushback to the idea of Jesus as a refugee, not to mention Mary and Joseph, rather pathetic, especially from Catholics who should know better. If you don't believe me, Pope Pius XII. He then posts an apostolic letter, part of it, from Pope Pius, where His Holiness says the Holy Family was the model for refugees, immigrants, etc. That's true. No one disputes that Jesus had to be taken into exile for safety. But taking a closer look at Martin's argument, he's conflating the term refugee, drawing a false equivalency here between the beginning with the major difference between the type of government as well as 2,000 years of history and nations developing and that sort of thing. The historical context of the Pope's letter, 1952, was the aftermath of World War II and the drawing of the Iron Curtain across Europe by the Soviet communists and all the social upheaval caused by that. Millions and millions and millions of Europeans uprooted and displaced from the most savage war in world history and the most brutal government. Likewise, Pope Pius was not advocating for anyone to claim refugee status to be admitted to any country willy-nilly. Pope Pius was well aware of the importance of national boundaries, as his own Vatican City state was completely surrounded by the Nazis during the war, and he insisted on them staying out. Matter of fact, a white line border was painted across the opening to St. Peter's Square, and it was there from 1943 to 1945, an international border. Further, if the goal is to escape violence or persecution in your homeland, then once you're free of that by escaping from the region, you don't need to keep fleeing, skipping over various available countries along the way. Take a look at this map of the Roman Empire at the time of Jesus' birth. Now let's zoom in close on the particular area that we're talking about. All of this is one single empire with different provinces. St. Joseph leads our Blessed Mother and baby Jesus to the closest possible place of refuge. Look, there's Judea, and then a little narrow strip there right by the, near the Red Sea, and, the Mediterranean, that area right there, that one little strip of land, and boom, he's in Egypt, just beyond the jurisdiction of King Herod. St. Joseph was instructed to flee to Egypt by an angel until, and this is a key point, until Herod was dead, and then return. It was never anything more than a temporary refuge. The angel did not tell him to move his family to the wealthiest part of the empire, skip over dozens of other provinces that provided equal refuge away from Herod, then plop down in Rome, live off the emperor, put down roots, and never leave. Also, the analogy falls apart at the comparison of modern countries and nation states with different provinces within a single empire. That's more akin to politically seeking refuge in Alabama from New York, where an evil governor rules. And that part's actually true, too. To put forth a papal document out of context to make a loaded political and faulty theological point is duplicitous as hell. And further, here was another response I made to Martin. Said another point Martin conveniently skips over is this. Pope Pius hid tens of thousands of Jews and escaped Allied prisoners all over the Vatican, on Vatican properties in Rome, in church properties all over Rome, and all over Europe. When the war was over, they didn't just stay. Those who could go back to their countries did. Those who could not were repatriated in dozens of different countries that would take them. How many refugees does Father Martin have living in his Midtown Manhattan property? In politics, it's liberals who deceive by omission. In theology, it's the heterodox who deceive by omission. But in both cases, they're deceivers.